So here we go. I know y'all are ready. Me too. I was gonna catch a fish and show you today, but they're just not biting. So what are we gonna talk about going forward with how to properly stock a pond? The first thing, the basis of every fish population when we're talking about largemouth bass, what they need to eat are bluegill. We're gonna say the Latin name, Lepomus macrochirus. Everybody together, Lepomus macrochirus. Beautiful. Now, here's the thing. Everybody gets into, well, do you stock the native strain? Do you stock the Florida strain, which is considered the copper-nosed bluegill? That's not what we're talking about. I don't really care about that. Obviously, depending on your region, you will stock one or the other. Here's the thing. You have to have the right numbers in the beginning, and you have to make sure through the process of your lake growing process that you have to have the right size bluegill to sustain a bass population. Everybody goes, well, Troy, listen, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about shad and tilapia and golden shiners and fathead minnows. That's great, love it, all well and good. But if your bluegill population is not what it should be, you're not gonna have the bass population that you should have. So here's what we're gonna do. So when we start stocking bluegill, what we want is not what the old standby is. So when you call folks, if anybody ever says, hey, we're gonna do a 10-to-1 ratio of bluegill to bass, a 10-to-1 ratio is fine if you're trying to have a sustainable food source in your backyard, but that is not what people really want today. Everybody's trying to grow that next big bass. So when we talk about stocking, we don't want to do a 10-to-1 ratio, and the reason is because you've already started what we call a bass crowded scenario. You don't want a bass crowded scenario, and a 10-to-1 bluegill to bass ratio is not what we want. So now we're stocking at 30-to-1, 40-to-1. We're making sure that that bluegill population is really hardy and really healthy, and that when you put the bass in, they have enough to eat. So when we say a 30 or a 41 ratio, sometimes we'll stock a lake with 2,000 bluegill per acre and maybe as few as 50 bass per acre. And that allows those bass a chance to eat what they need to. The bluegill have a chance to grow the way they need to and not get all of that predation that comes upon them. They can survive, they can thrive, and they can continue to reproduce. And as long as you're harvesting those bass, those bluegill will continue to do that. So as you move forward through a population, what you always look at as a population ages is you want to look at how healthy that bluegill population is in comparison to the bass population. So a bass basically needs to eat a bluegill that is about 1/3 of its length. So an 18-inch bass needs a bluegill that's about 6 inches long. So when you look at the population, if all you're seeing is a little bitty short bluegill, probably means you're bluegill crowded. And you can fix that by adding a few bass. If you see a population with big bluegill and a lot of little bitty bass, it means you're probably bass crowded, and you need to fix that by adding smaller bluegill to help those bass get past that hump and harvest those bass. What you want to see when you go into a pond, and if we do an electrofishing survey, you want to see bluegill from this big all the way to this big, and that makes sure that ensures that your bass can continue to grow the way that they need to, and that they get to the lengths and the weights that they need to get to. So here's the thing. Anytime somebody tells you we're going to do a 10-to-1 ratio, we're not going to do a 10-to-1 ratio ever, no matter what the scenario, whether you're an aggressive trophy manager or just a balanced type of person. If you want a balanced lake, you're never going to do a 10-to-1 ratio. It's not balanced in the beginning. So in a balanced scenario, what you're going to stock from the beginning is about 1,500 bluegill per acre and about 60 bass per acre. If you want to be a little more aggressive than that, something middle of the road, not quite trophy, but not quite balanced, you're going to do 2,000 bluegill per acre and about 60 bass per acre. And then if you want to go even more aggressive to what we consider a true trophy bass scenario, you would do something in the neighborhood of 2,500 bluegill per acre and about 50 bass per acre. So that's a 50-to-1 ratio. That is a huge difference in the 10-to-1 ratio that we used to talk about. So keep that in mind. Bluegill are awesome. It's the basis of everything you're going to do with your bass population. Everything else is supplemental, and we'll talk about that in the next coming weeks. Happy What It Is Wednesday to you. Like the hair, like the Carhartt. My hair will be cut by next week. Be a little bit better. All right. Happy Wednesday to y'all. See you next week.